What's up, guys? Welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host, Caleb. If you want to support me, you can always use that TCGplayer link in the description down below, or as always, just liking, commenting, subscribing will do the trick. Another thing that could really help you out, as well as me, is following me on Moxfill. This is the easiest way for you to copy my deck list, tweak them to your liking, and then playtest them. Now, let's get into today's Deck Tech with Henzie, and honestly, guys, he's a little crazy. Not only is he pseudo-ramp in the command zone, he also is card draw in the command zone, which is exactly what you need for most of your decks to work, and now it's in the command zone. Another thing we can do to really break this guy is throw umori in the companion zone. Yes, this is going to be an all creatures deck where we can reduce our creatures by a lot. So what happens is we can end up casting Henzie as soon as turn 2, and then turn 3, shove a more into our hand. That way, by turn 4, all of our creatures are reduced by 2 CMC, which is broken. And to your opponents, it kind of looks like you just ramped twice for a lot of mana. But that is not what this is. You can do that for every single creature. So you're just throwing multiple 4 drops for 2 mana onto the battlefield, 7 drops for 5 mana, and it ends up overwhelming the board very quickly. Another thing that Henzie's really good at is hiding your threat assessment, because your threat assessment is in your hand. They don't know how scary you are until you start going off, and by the time you start going off, it's probably too late. This deck can get crazy as turn 6 and turn 7, just being able to wipe out an entire board. And for some reason, there is a lot of ways we can jam in a one-sided board wipe in an all-creature deck. So, if that sounds like a deck tech you want to get into, let's get into it. First things first, let's talk about that special tech that we run for Henzie, Goreclaw. This is going to be amazing now with our commander and umori on the battlefield. With this girl, we're going to lower the cost of our creatures by a total of 4. For those bombs that are 7 drops, now you're literally just paying 3 mana and dropping them onto the battlefield. Another amazing synergy is Gwenna. Now whenever we're casting those 5 power creatures, we're just untapping her. This can cause us to literally just dump our entire hand onto the battlefield, drawing a new hand whenever they all die. Especially if you also have Goreclaw on the battlefield, this effectively makes all your 7 drops 1 mana. Nikya, this is an all creature deck, so we have to include her, and boom, just double up our mana. Super free, super amazing. Bramble Sovereign, whenever you copy a creature card, it literally just copies what's printed on the card. So if we can blitz out a creature and then pay Bramble Sovereign's cost, it's basically creating a token copy of the creature for no extra cost, right? Because umori plus our commander is lowering it by 2. So if we cost a 7 drop for 7, copying it with Bramble Sovereign, boom, you just, for no extra mana, made 2 copies of a creature, 1 with haste, and that draws you a card whenever it dies. Machias the Unhallowed. This is one of the ways we can one-sided board wipe. Just make sure this guy's on the battlefield and cast a Deathbringer Regent, and boom, no one's got a board state and you have all your 7 drops. Enjoy that. Giant Ataphage, usually a terrible card because I've literally never attacked with this thing if it didn't have haste. Boom, now it has haste. So it's extremely easy to get him for that 7 damage and immediately create a token copy of it. Baylor, this guy is honestly an overperformer. As long as someone has 7 cards in their hand, this can literally take almost half of their life down, a total of 19 damage. 7 from the attack trigger, 7 from the die trigger, and 5 damage to the face by attacking. Pathbreaker Ibex, this is basically just a Craterhoof behemoth in this deck, right? The problem with Pathbreaker Ibex is it never has haste, or if it does, you just win the game, right? Well, now it essentially always has haste because of your commander, so it can just win you the game as easy as a Craterhoof behemoth can. Protean Hulk. Some very good targets for this are probably going to be Pathbreaker Ibex or Machias the Unhallowed. It's also just a really toolboxy card that can get you answers to whatever you need on the board state at that time. Most of our removal are ETB creatures, so at the end step it'll die, you'll get the ETBs, and you'll get rid of the threat. Super solid, super efficient. We also have a decent amount of recursion in the deck. Chainer Nightmare Adept, one of the best. Not only does it give your commander haste or anything you reanimate haste, it also gives you the ability to cast stuff from your graveyard once per turn, but we can use that dash cost from the graveyard using Chainer, so that's going to be super solid. Marin of Clan Neltoth, we are sacrificing a bunch of stuff, and it's going to be amazing to just dash out our biggest creature, and then we'll get it back to our hand to dash out next turn, if not just straight onto the battlefield. Timeless Witness, this is better than Eternal Witness in the deck because it is 4 mana, which is essentially 2 mana in this deck, that will draw us a card whenever it dies. Ancient Brass Dragon, this guy's insane. You can blitz this guy out and reanimate your entire graveyard if you roll high enough. And hey, if you low roll, you should just stop being bad at the game. Felden of the Third Path is also a super solid option to run because he gives the creatures haste, so now we're just reanimating 7 drops with haste from our graveyard instead of from our hand. He can kind of be a worse commander in the deck if we do lose our Henzie. We also run some crazy mana generators with Old Gnawbone and Clouth Unrivaled Ancient. These cards will just allow us to dump our entire hand onto the battlefield. Spore Frog, I threw this guy in here because sometimes you blitz out a lot of creatures, they all die, and you have no board state, but you did a lot that turn. So Spore Frog can buy us a turn to rebuild. Etali Primal Conqueror. This is literally in here for the ETB. The ETB is broken, and there's a lot of ways to just dash this guy out, get the ETB, let him die, we don't care about him. Sereth, the Viper's Fang. This one's solid because it's honestly just some cool hexproof tech for an all-creature deck. Morag, Fury of Akum. This guy just wins games, guys. As long as you have something that can put lands onto the battlefield, or even like there's a ton of creatures in this deck that just throw 3 lands to 2 lands onto the battlefield, you're getting a lot of extra combat steps, and with Henzie, you can't let that happen. This guy just wins the game, and honestly, he's a super solid target for that Protean Hulk trigger. Let's move on to some ramp because there's a lot of it, and I want to spend a little extra time on it. That way you guys can identify a really good opener and really know how to abuse the deck. Definitely the best cards in our opener are Ignoble Hierarch, Birds of Paradise, and Elves of Deep Shadow. This means we can cast Henzie turn 2, and turn 3 we can put Umori into our hand and cast him turn 4. We'll be perfectly ready to storm off turn 5 this way. Another scenario where this can happen is if we have Bloom Tinder in our starter. Cast Bloom Tinder turn 2, turn 3 Henzie, tap Bloom Tinder for 3 mana, boom, Umori's into our hand, and then turn 4 Umori, turn 5 storm off. Some other amazing cards in our opener are Solemn Simulacrum. He just turns into fetch a land, draw 2. Ondu Giant, Primeval Herald, Seed Guide Ash, and Rampant Rejuvenator will also just shove a lot of lands onto the battlefield while also replacing themselves. This is why the deck is so powerful. Every creature in the deck, which is the entire deck, just replaces itself. We do have some other early ramp options with Secure Tribuilder, Incubation Druid, Gyre Sage. Gyre Sage can get absolutely massive in this deck because of that evolve trigger, and then Somber Walled Sage, another super awesome tech card because again our entire deck is creatures. Moving on to card advantage, we have Grim Horospex, Midnight Reaper, and Korvold. These are all cards that upgrade our creatures from cantrips into straight up card draw. Now we're not staying even, we're getting ahead. Samut is a super cheap card that comes down early that can do something very similar, as long as we're attacking with those blitzed creatures, which let's be honest, why wouldn't we? Disciple of Bolas, super solid, especially when we can blitz her and she can draw a card off of herself. Shadowheart works very similarly. I find myself just blitzing her out and immediately activating her ability to just turn her into card draw and then sacrifice a giant creature to just get an entire new hand. Beast Whisperer, Soul of the Harvest, and Guruk's Pack Leader are very similar to the die triggers, right? Now we're just getting double card advantage off of our creatures, and Soul of the Harvest can even trigger whenever they enter the battlefield from the graveyard, so he's probably the best effect but also most expensive. Toski, Bearer of Secrets, and Orin Frostfang are just going to draw us cards whenever our massive board is just dealing a lot of damage to our opponents. Grothama. I like this one. This one seems like really good tech in here because it just kills itself as soon as it dies, and you can have all of the other like minuscule creatures that you blitz onto the battlefield fight it before it dies. So not only will you get an entire new hand, you're probably going to get that and then some. Dragon Mage is another solid one that's just going to net us an entire new hand along with Null Spine Dragon. Now you will have to play this after combat, which is kind of like in the deck because I want to deal 7 damage with my Null Spine Dragon, but it's still okay. Moving on to board wipes, I'm so excited. I finally found a deck I can shove my Dread Kako Demon into, and it doesn't feel weird. This guy has completely just wiped the board and left my entire board of massive creatures alone. I've had people scoop off of this. Deathbringer Regent also makes the list as a super solid board wipe that'll draw you a card. Ravenous Chupacabra, Cavalier of Knights. Notably, notice the CMC on these. We're only going to be casting these for 2 to 3 mana at most, and they again replace themselves. It's super efficient. Necron Deathmark, another solid one that can mill us a little bit, get us to some answers in our graveyard. Druid of Purification. Every time I've played this card, I've been really impressed with it. The whole board gets basically dealt with anything that's not a creature, right? And then if it doesn't do that, you just draw a card off of it. Kogla the Titanate. This guy's amazing. He's creature removal, enchantment removal, and artifact removal all in one card. Terror of the Peaks, you knew this card would be in here. It just wins games in this deck. Massacre Worm, another 6-drop creature that comes in on ETB and removes an entire board state. This is why Protean Hulk is an amazing card in the deck. People are going to think it's a combo, just let them know there's no combos in the deck. And then Protean Hulk is just the amazing toolbox that can just fetch us any answer to anything. Reclamation Sage and Caustic Caterpillar are just super efficient cards that get rid of those artifacts and enchantments. Vivictus Asmati the Dyer. This guy does not whiff in the deck, right? Remember, this is all creatures, so we're either getting a land or a creature off of this, and we are removing all of our opponent's permanents while we're doing that. So we can dash this guy onto the battlefield, get rid of everybody's permanents all at once, and then he dies, or you know, maybe he's here to stay. Last but not least, we have Torre the Incinerator. Again, we've got ramp and removal. There's a ton of crossover in the deck. Honestly, all it does is a ramp super hard, draw a lot of cards, and then remove everything until you win the game by throwing massive creatures onto the battlefield and overwhelming your opponents. That's gonna do it for the deck tech, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. As always, don't forget, follow me on Moxfield, test the deck out. I think it's insane. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section. As always, I hope this helped you in your deck building endeavors, and I will see you in the next one.